In this video, we're going to do a quick walkthrough of problem 16-69. Comprehensive variances. We're going to calculate direct material variances. We're going to calculate direct labor variances, variable manufacturing overhead variances, and finally our fixed manufacturing overhead volume variance. Let's go ahead and start with the information that we're given. One of the first things that we're told is that we've got our master budget is based on 3,000 direct labor hours, and notice our direct labor hour per unit is 5 hours per unit. So we're going to use that to break down our manufacturing overhead into both fixed and variable components, as well as calculating a predetermined overhead rate. So let's go ahead and get going with that right now. So we've got a budget of 30,000 direct labor hours, our master budget, and we apply overhead at 5 hours per direct labor hour. So that means our master budget was based on 30,000 divided by 5, 6,000 units of production. That's going to be important because we're told our factory overhead cost is $104 per unit, and that's 70 variable and 34 fixed. So if we take 6,000 units and multiply it by 70, we get our total variable overhead. And if we take our 34 and multiply it by the 6,000, we get our total fixed manufacturing overhead. We're applying overhead on the basis of direct labor hours, so we can calculate our predetermined overhead rates. We're going to take the 420 and divide it by 30,000 hours. We're going to be applying our variable manufacturing overhead at $14 per hour and fixed at $204 divided by 30 to get $6.80 per hour. We're going to use that information later on. We're given standards here, and we're given, of course, our actual level of production. And that actual level of production is really important for preparing or calculating our flexible budget amounts. And we're told that the actual level of production is 5,500 units. So we're now going to use our standard costs along with our actual material cost to calculate our direct material variances. So again, 5,500 actual units is what we produced. So our standard quantity will be 5,500 times our 40 yards per unit, for a total of 220,000 yards is what we would expect to use to make 5,500 units, and our standard price is $2.50 per yard. Actual information, we are told we will use 240,000 yards at an actual price of $2.60 per yard. So our actual material cost, 240 times the 260 is 624,000. We would have expected to spend only 550,000. Of course, that means we have a total direct material spending variance of the difference between those two amounts, or $74,000. And that, of course, is unfavorable because we spent more than we would have expected. The price variance, let's go ahead and calculate our price variance, our quantity variance, and pick these things up. Actual quantity used, again, 240. Our standard price was 250. And we can calculate that center column 250 times 240, $600,000. Our price variance, of course, is unfavorable because our actual material cost of $2.60 a yard was higher than our planned. We can calculate that price variance one of two ways, simply the difference between the 624 and the 600,000, or we can calculate it as the difference in cost per yard of 10 cents per yard times the 240,000 yards that we purchased. The quantity variance, our quantity variance will be unfavorable as well because we used 240,000, we should have used 220. We can calculate this quantity variance quite a few different ways. Our overall variance was 74, unfavorable. So if the price was 24 unfavorable, That means the quantity variance would have to be 50,000 unfavorable. Alternatively, we can take the difference between the 600,000 and the 550. That gives us 50,000. Or we can take the excess yards. We had an excess of 20,000 yards. Again, that's the difference between the 240 and the 220 at 250 per yard. And there's our 50,000 as well. Let's go ahead now and calculate our direct labor variances. Our standard hours, again, this is going to be based on 5,500 units, our actual level of production. Right there she is, the 5,500 yards, or units rather. Our standard hours then to produce that would have been 5,500 units at our standard or budgeted amount of 5 hours per unit, which is right there. We would have expected to work 27,500 hours and our standard labor rate, $26 per hour. So we would have expected to have spent $715,000 in labor to make our 5,500 units. What did we actually spend? Well, we worked 28,300 hours. We paid our employees $27.30 per unit for a total of 28 times the 27. We spent a total of $772,590. So our variance is the difference between the 772 and the 715. We spent an extra 57,000. We have an unfavorable variance. Let's go ahead and calculate it. Again, actual hours, 28,300. Our standard rate was 26. Calculate that center column, 28 times the 26. We've got 735,800. Our rate variance, of course, is going to be unfavorable because we paid our employees $27.30. We expected to pay them $26. So we're going to have an unfavorable rate variance, and that is going to be the difference between the 772,000 and the 735. Or, of course, we can calculate that by taking the extra $1.30 per hour, and we paid them for 28,300 hours. The efficiency variance, difference between the 735 and the 715, and it also will be unfavorable, and we know that because overall our variance was unfavorable, 57, and we've only accounted for 36, so we know this one has to be unfavorable. But more to the point, we should have spent 27,000 hours making these 5,500 units. It took us 28,500. We can also calculate this variance as the difference in hours. We worked an extra 800 hours at a cost of, standard cost of $26 per hour. Let's move on now to our direct manufacturing overhead variance. We're applying overhead basis of standard hours, labor hours, so we're going to have the same 27,500. But now we're going to use the standards from above that we calculated. A variable manufacturing predetermined overhead rate of $14 per hour, and of course our actual overhead of $620. So variable $14 per hour. We would have expected to spend 27 times 14. We're not told specifically how much our actual fixed overhead is. We're going to assume our fixed overhead equaled our budgeted overhead. I don't know if that's a great assumption, but we don't really have anything else to work with. So we're going to assume that our fixed was 204. So if our total was 620, our actual variable would have been 620,000 minus 204,000. actual hours, again, our actual hours would have been the 28,300 because we're using overhead, direct labor. We can back into an actual rate. There's really no such thing, but for calculations purposes, we can back into it. Our total variance, again, total spending variance would have been the 416 minus the 385, 31,000. We spent more than we thought, unfavorable. The rate variance, we can calculate that. Again, let's put in our center column numbers, actual hours, 28,300, standard rate. We would expect a predetermined overhead rate of 14, and the difference for our center column amount is 396,200. So our rate variance, the difference between those numbers, 416 minus the 396, 19,800, and of course it's unfavorable because we spent more than we would have based on our standard and actuals. And the efficiency variance again will be unfavorable because we took longer than we should have. And our efficiency variance, the difference between the 396 and the 385. Two unfavorable variances, again, add up to and equal our overall variable overhead spending variance. All right, we're assuming our fixed manufacturing overhead equaled our budgeted amount because we had nothing else to do, and I don't know what they asked for this, but 204. Our budgeted amount, and keep in mind, fixed manufacturing overhead budget is the same for both our flexible and our static. We're going with the 204. And again, we calculated this. The 204 right here, this number really was just sort of a guess. We used this to back into that number as well. If we had picked a different number for our actual, our different number for actual fixed would have been different as well. All we were told was that in total, our overall total factory overhead was 620. So, again, standard hours, we're applying on the basis of direct labor. We've got the 27,500. Our standard rate, we calculated that again. Our predetermined manufacturing overhead rate for fixed manufacturing overhead was $6.80 per hour. So we would have applied 187,000. Our budget was 204, so our volume variance was 17,000, and this would have been unfavorable. Of course, our overall variance, 204, overall variance, the 204 minus the 187, it also would have been unfavorable. The question doesn't ask for those, but had it asked for that, and if this indeed was 0, then we would have had that total fixed overhead variance of 17,000 unfavorable.